Think you know your eye color? If you have hazel eyes, think again. This rare genetic anomaly means your eyes shift color, reacting to light and surroundings like magic. But that color-changing trick is not just a curiosity. It is a clue, a biological signal pointing toward one of the strangest and most layered stories in all of human genetics. Only around 5% of the global population has hazel eyes. Yet walk through parts of Spain or Portugal and that number climbs dramatically. A 2009 study found over half of one Spanish cohort had hazel or hazel green eyes. That concentration is not random. It is the result of thousands of years of migration, mixture, and selection playing out on a single peninsula at the edge of Europe. Scientists can predict brown or blue eyes from DNA with 90 to 95% accuracy. For hazel eyes, that number drops to between 50 and 80%. The most sophisticated genetic tools available still cannot fully explain this trait. Ancient cultures called it mystical. Modern geneticists call it complex. Both are saying the same thing. This is the story of where hazel eyes came from, why they concentrated where they did, and why, after everything science has uncovered, they remain the most mysterious eye color on Earth. Not all hazel eyes are the same. There are two distinct varieties. The first type carries stronger green hues, a hazel green that sits close to pure green, but warmer, more layered, less fixed. The second type pulls toward brown, a hazel brown that in certain lighting can look almost amber, almost copper, almost something else entirely. Both types share the same essential quality. They refuse to stay still. This is the color-changing effect, and it is not an illusion. It is physics and biology operating simultaneously. One mechanism is Rayleigh scattering, the same process that makes the sky appear blue. Light entering the iris scatters in ways that shift the perceived color depending on the angle and intensity of the source. Change the lighting, and you change what the eye looks like. But hazel eyes layer additional complexity on top of it. Melanin distribution inside a hazel iris is uneven. There is typically a brownish ring around the pupil with greener or golden tones spreading outward. The balance between eumelanin and pheomelanin, the two primary forms of pigment, determines how much light is absorbed versus reflected. Shift that balance, and the color shifts with it. Surrounding colors in clothing or environment can enhance certain pigments, pulling the eye visibly greener or browner. Some people even report shifts tied to mood, eyes going greener under stress, warmer under calm. Hazel eyes sit almost perfectly between blue and brown on the melanin spectrum, not a little bit between, precisely between. And that intermediate position is exactly where the genetics get complicated. The science of eye color used to seem simple. Brown dominant, blue recessive, one or two genes doing the work. That model was wrong, and nowhere does it fall apart more completely than with hazel eyes. The primary genetic players are OCA2 and HERC2, two genes on chromosome 15 that together regulate melanin production in the iris. Brown-eyed people carry variants that drive high melanin output. Blue-eyed people carry variants that suppress it almost entirely. Hazel-eyed people sit in the middle, producing intermediate levels, neither fully saturated nor fully absent. But OCA2 and HERC2 do not tell the whole story, not even close. Several additional genes contribute to the final result: SLC24, A4, and SLC45. A2 influence melanin levels and help determine where on the color spectrum an eye ultimately lands. TYR and TYRP1 affect shade and undertone, the difference between a warmer hazel brown and a cooler hazel green. SIP and IRF4 influence how light scatters inside the iris itself, feeding directly into that color-shifting quality that makes hazel eyes so visually unpredictable. These genes interact, suppress, and amplify each other in combinations researchers are still working to fully map. This is what polygenic inheritance looks like in practice. Not one gene making one decision, but a network of genetic factors producing an outcome that resists clean prediction. Brown versus blue eyes can be called from DNA with 90 to 95% accuracy. Hazel drops that figure to between 50 and 80%. Ancient cultures sensed something genuinely unresolved here. The science now confirms it. Hazel eyes remain partly beyond prediction because they are partly beyond explanation. Brown eyes are the original. That much is settled. Homo sapiens emerged with brown eyes, high melanin protecting the iris in equatorial environments where UV radiation was relentless. For most of human prehistory, there was no other option. Brown was not a color, it was the default. Blue eyes are considerably younger, but older than most people assume. A 2008 study initially estimated blue eyes emerged between 6 and 10,000 years ago. Later research pushed that figure back substantially. Some researchers argue the mutation could have appeared as far back as 42,000 years ago. What is confirmed is a 2016 study identifying blue eye-linked mutations in the HERC2 region in ancient skeletal remains from the Caucasus and Italy, individuals who lived between 13 and 14,000 years ago. Blue eyes were already present in Europe long before the first farmers arrived. That detail matters because of what happened next. Western hunter-gatherers, who had roamed Europe for millennia, largely carried blue eyes. The early European farmers who moved into Europe from Anatolia around 8 to 6,000 years ago largely carried brown. When these two populations met and mixed, something intermediate became possible for the first time. That intersection is almost certainly where hazel eyes first appeared in meaningful numbers. Not a single person, not a single moment, but a population-level event. Blue-eyed and brown-eyed ancestry combining to produce offspring whose melanin production landed somewhere between the two extremes. The first hazel eyes were not an accident of mutation. They were the biological result of two worlds colliding. That collision happened across much of Europe, so why did hazel eyes concentrate so heavily in one particular corner of it? The Iberian Peninsula sits at a precise intersection. Northern European populations moving south carried the blue-eyed genetic legacy of Western hunter-gatherers and later steppe peoples. North African populations moving north across the narrow strait separating the continents carried the brown-eyed ancestry dominant across that region. Iberia absorbed both, not once but across multiple waves spanning thousands of years. Climate likely played a reinforcing role. Hazel eyes are most common in temperate zones where moderate melanin levels carry a practical advantage. Too far north and selection pressure favors lighter eyes. Too far south and higher melanin becomes essential. Iberia sits in neither extreme, occupying a middle band where intermediate pigmentation is not just genetically possible, but environmentally coherent. Then there is the Al-Andalus period. Between 711 and 1492, Muslim rule brought sustained and substantial gene flow from North Africa into Iberia. This was not brief contact. It was nearly 8 centuries of population movement concentrated in a region already genetically layered. Southern Iberia absorbed this ancestry deeply, creating exactly the kind of blue-brown admixture environment in which hazel eyes proliferate. Sexual selection may have amplified the result further. A color-shifting, visually striking eye color sitting at the intersection of multiple ancestry streams would not have struggled for attention. Iberia did not invent hazel eyes. It perfected the conditions for them. A landmark study analyzing 271 ancient Iberians traced those conditions across 8,000 years, revealing a region that never stopped absorbing new ancestry. The story begins around 5,500 BCE, when the first farmers arrived from Anatolia, bringing brown-eyed ancestry with them and layering it over the lighter-eyed hunter-gatherer populations already present. Then the Bronze Age arrived with the most dramatic genetic shift Iberia had ever seen. Between 2,200 and 900 BCE, approximately 40% of Iberian ancestry was replaced by incoming groups carrying steppe ancestry from the Pontic-Caspian region. Y-DNA haplogroups that had dominated Iberia, markers like I2, G2, and H, were almost entirely displaced by R1b M269. The evidence suggests this migration was male-biased, accelerating haplogroup replacement while leaving maternal lineages more mixed. The Roman period shifted Iberian genetics eastward toward present-day Italians and Greeks through increased Mediterranean mobility. North African ancestry entered more substantially during this time, partly through Roman trade networks and partly through earlier Phoenician and Punic presence. The Visigoths followed, but left a comparatively shallow genetic mark. Then came Al-Andalus. Nearly 8 centuries of concentrated North African gene flow created the deepest admixture layer the peninsula had yet accumulated. Each wave left something behind. Iberia never fully replaced what came before. It folded it in. Those layers are still readable today as living markers in the DNA of modern Iberians. On the paternal side, R1b dominates. Between 60 and 70% of Iberian men carry this haplogroup, with the subclade R1b df27 appearing at especially high frequencies across Spain and Portugal. This is the direct echo of that Bronze Age steppe migration, the wave that reshaped Iberian Y DNA so completely that earlier haplogroups were nearly erased. Steppe populations carried lighter pigmentation ancestry, deepening the blue-eyed genetic contribution already present from Western hunter-gatherers. The North African signal is still there. Branches of E1b1b, particularly EM81 and EV13, appear in roughly 5 to 15% of Iberian men today. Haplogroup J, both J1 and J2, accounts for another 5 to 10%, reflecting Phoenician, Punic, Roman era, and Levantine influences. These lineages carry the brown-eyed ancestry that met and mixed with the lighter-eyed populations already established in the peninsula. The maternal picture reinforces everything. Haplogroup H dominates at 40 to 50%, with H1 and H3 especially prominent, reflecting deep European Mesolithic and Neolithic roots. U5 connects back to ancient hunter-gatherer ancestry. U6 traces directly to North African Berber populations. Both sit inside the same modern Iberian gene pool. This is what a Hazel eye looks like at the population level. Not one ancestry, not two, but multiple streams of human movement converging on a single peninsula and producing a color that science still cannot fully predict. Here is the thing that should genuinely humble anyone who assumes genetics has closed the book on human biology. Hazel eyes remain incompletely explained, not mostly explained with loose ends, incompletely explained in ways that sit at the center of the trait, not at its edges. The prediction problem reflects something real about the biology. Brown and blue eyes differ primarily at a single well-understood genetic locus. Hazel eyes involve a network of interacting genes whose combined behavior the best current models can only predict correctly between 50 and 80% of the time. For a field that can read ancient population movements from fragments of bone, that number is striking. Ancient cultures noticed something here without the vocabulary to describe it. Egyptian, Greek, and Celtic traditions all associated hazel eyes with perception beyond the ordinary. That association almost certainly arose from the color-changing quality itself. The uncanny way hazel eyes respond to the world around them, as though the world is being actively read rather than passively seen. The science now explains the mechanism. It does not fully dissolve the strangeness. What hazel eyes ultimately represent is something more significant than a pigmentation quirk. They are a biological record of human movement. Every time two populations with different eye color ancestry mixed, the conditions for hazel eyes improved. Western hunter-gatherers meeting early European farmers, steppe migrants moving into an already layered peninsula, North African populations crossing into Iberia across 8 centuries of sustained contact. Each encounter left a genetic trace, and hazel eyes are among the most visible expressions of that trace walking around on the surface of the planet today. We know where they came from. We know why they concentrated where they did. We do not yet fully know how to predict them. That gap between what the history reveals and what genetics cannot yet cleanly resolve is precisely what makes them the most mysterious trait in human biology. 5% of the world carries this. A color that shifts with the light responds to mood and surroundings, and sits at a genetic intersection science still cannot fully map. That is remarkable enough on its own. But the deeper story is what hazel eyes actually are beneath the surface. They are an archive. Every hazel-eyed person alive today carries the biological record of populations that met, mixed, and moved across thousands of years of human history. The hunter-gatherers whose blue-eyed descendants collided with brown-eyed farmers at the edge of the Neolithic. The steppe migrants who reshaped an entire peninsula's Y-DNA in a single Bronze Age wave. The North African populations who crossed into Iberia and stayed for 8 centuries, folding their ancestry into everything already there. None of those people knew they were building toward something. They were living, moving, surviving, reproducing. But the result of all that movement is visible today in the eyes of roughly 1 in 20 people on Earth, concentrated most heavily in the place where the most layers accumulated. Next time you catch a hazel eye shifting from green to gold in changing light, understand what you are actually seeing. You are seeing thousands of years of human migration expressed as color. You are seeing the biological record of a crossroads that never stopped absorbing the world around it. The mystery is not a flaw in the science. It is a feature of the history, and that history is still very much alive.